All right, hello guys. Before the video starts, I just wanted to give some credit. I will have the link down in the description, but I wanted to say I used some clips from GameSpot Universe's video on some of Bronn's funniest moments, so check that out if you would like to, but I just wanted to say that because I used some of their clips for just some background for the character of Bronn. Enjoy.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblin YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be continuing on with our ranking of the top 100 A Song of Ice and Fire characters in the history and also the main story. I know a lot of you guys have been getting a little bit confused by that. I see it in the comments. But when I do this, I mean basically like the histories all time, any character that George has made in this world. And so that is very important to understand. So when I have characters like Mance at 99, it's not because Mance is a bad character. In Fire and Blood, Dunk and Egg, A World of Ice and Fire, the main story, he is one of the 100 best characters ever written. That's a pretty big accomplishment. So I want to point that out just so you guys know. And I also, before I kind of get into like the character analysis side of the character of Bronn, I kind of want to get into why Bronn is 98. And Bronn to me is a character which he's a very fun and entertaining character, but he's a character that gives us a different side than we normally see, right? Book one is predominantly told by the big houses of Westeros, right? And so we don't see a lot of characters in which they come from more humble beginnings, or a character that's been forced to do some very morally gray things, or give us kind of what it's like to be an average person in this world. And so Bronn is that insight into what it's like. Bronn in a lot of ways is very similar to Dunk in terms of how they start off. Now the two are very different in their actual character demeanor, but very similar. And that's kind of the hints and beats that I think maybe could have helped inspire the character of Dunk is a character like Bronn. And so Bronn is a character that we don't know a lot of his background. He's very similar to Ygritte, right? We have some things we can kind of speculate on, but he doesn't have the best background in the world, right? So that's something that definitely makes it to where he's lower down on this list. But what we do have is we have him as a, I would even say a main character through the first 3 books, and then he's on a side plot for book 4. But he shares a lot of book time with Tyrion at King's Landing or on his journeys. And so we get a lot to know about this character specifically. And so I found it to where the amount of book time he had really influenced why I put him above Ygritte and also Mance. Whereas I think Mance's strengths, Mance has more of an interesting background and or like character. He's someone that can be very interesting overall for the story, but he's someone not on screen very often. He's someone we don't get to interact with very often at all. And so that's the big problem with Mance. And then Ygritte and Bronn are very similar. I think Ygritte's more likable than Bronn, but I think Bronn is a character we get more of. And so that to me is a really big influential reason as to why Bronn is on here at number 98. So yeah, before I got into his whole life and going through who he is as a character, I wanted to really set the grounds for why the character is here and why I chose to put him a little bit higher than Mance and Ygritte. But I also wanted to take this time to thank my Patreons and members for supporting me. Also, if you did want to become one, it does help support me and this channel, and also you do get videos early, so consider that if that interests you at all. And let's get into the video and Bronn of the Blackwater. I want to start with a quote about Bronn, and this comes from a Game of Thrones, from Tyrion and Bronn's interactions after they leave the Eyrie. Tyrion, scum you may be, but you're undeniably useful, and with a sword in your hand, you're almost as good as my brother Jaime. What do you want, Bronn? Gold, land, women, keep me alive, and you'll have it. And if you die, why then I'll have one mourner whose grief is sincere. The gold ends when I do. And I think this is very relevant to understanding the character of Bronn in terms of what does he want? What is he motivated by? He wants more. He is someone that we know came from a very low birthing status, and he's someone that, again, if you think about this world, people don't usually switch social ranks very easily. It's something very difficult. You're kind of kept in a cycle of either poverty or living a very rich lifestyle. You're kind of born into that in this world. That's way more the case in this world than it is in, say, like today's world, even though it's still a thing kind of in today's world as well. And so when we look at the character of Bronn, you can understand why he wants to climb that ladder of power, wealth, and things that he wants. And so when we get this quote, it is really Bronn seeing that opportunity to kind of climb that ladder up. And so again, we don't know exactly when Bronn was born. We know it was in between the years 264 and 268 AC. Again, made unclear. We're not exactly sure on his age, but this would place his age in the normal story at his early to mid 30s. So again, he's still pretty much in his prime. I would say your prime would probably be your 20s, but you're still early on in your 30s. He's still a very agile, strong man that we see in the normal story. But something else that's kind of made unclear. I was trying to figure out where Bronn was actually born. Like, where is he from? And we're not actually sure in the book. I know in the Game of Thrones canon, at least, if you look at the Game of Thrones wiki, it says he's from the Riverlands, which I think is a pretty good indication given where we catch up with the character. It seems like Bronn is a sellsword. He's fairly poor at this point, and he's around the Crossroad Inns, which is probably a pretty good indication that he's from the Riverlands, around that area. And so that is kind of where we pick up with the character of Bronn. We don't have a lot in his background or how he was brought up, but we know he was probably a low-born peasant who probably learned to fight. Now, we don't know if that was taught maybe by his father. Maybe he had a father that was in an army, and so he learned to fight from a master of arms or something like that. Either way, we do know that Bronn became a clever fighter. He is someone that kind of puts honor and things like that to the side. If you're in a battle for your life, you're kind of wanting to do whatever is going to keep you alive. I think that's something that's interesting. We'll talk about with the Tower of Joy in the coming books. Maybe we'll find out more about what happened to Arthur Dayne. That could be something that they go like the Game of Thrones route where Arthur Dayne got stabbed in the back. That would be interesting, right? To kind of play into kind of what Bronn's whole persona is about. He is someone that's for himself. He is a very selfish person in a lot of ways. But you have to think about this idea of Bronn being this low-born peasant, or maybe he was a son of a soldier, or maybe just a camp follower, or the son of like a hedge knight, something like that. But we don't know. Again, very unclear on his backstory. I think of the three characters we've done, Bronn is probably the weakest of the three. But I think where we get to Bronn as a interesting character is the normal story, where we pick up with him in book 1. But yeah, I just want to kind of show as to why Bronn probably becomes the way he is. When you're born in such poverty, you want to get to a place of luxury. You want to have some pleasantries, and I can totally understand why Bronn wants those things. You know, his family going generations back and back have probably never even experienced some of the things that he gets in Clash of Kings because of Tyrion. So I think that's all really relevant. But again, it just shows Bronn's cleverness as he recognizes big lords and how to get favor with them. I think that's really something that's important. But getting to a Game of Thrones, we see as Bronn is in the Crossroad Inn. It's uncertain why he's here. Maybe he's here just because it's the Crossroad Inn. It's a normal meeting place. Maybe Bronn was on some other way to maybe sell his sword, given the conflict going on. That's another thing we haven't really considered is, given the time of a Game of Thrones, war was brewing between the Lannisters and the Tullys. So maybe he was just looking to sell his sword to whichever side would have him, and that's how he was going to try and make a living. So that's all something that could be possible. And we see that Bronn is someone that pledges his sword to Catelyn to take Tyrion. Now, why does Bronn do this? Again, I think it's very clear. Bronn is realizing that he can get food, he can get coin, he can get some favor. Hell, maybe he could even become a knight for Catelyn and the Starks as a whole. And so he follows Catelyn. Now, one thing we have to really consider, we don't know if you're in Bronn's shoes and you pledge your sword to Catelyn to help bring Tyrion to Winterfell, because that's what she announces to the whole group that's there. He does not know they were going to the Eyrie. And so as soon as they go to the Eyrie, someone like Bronn has to be seeing, okay, this isn't great, right? This is a situation that could easily get himself killed. And so we see all of his actions throughout getting to the Eyrie are about self-preservation. One of his companions that he's with at the inn actually ends up taking an injury, and Bronn is the one that puts him down. And that's because his friend was moaning too much, making too much noise. It would be easy for the mountain clans or others to find them at night and kill them because of the noise. And so he kills them, and so he kills him. And us, the audience, are thinking, this is kind of a morally gray act. It's like, yes, the guy was probably going to die, but at the same time, you're murdering another human being for having an injury. It's an interesting predicament that we're in if you're Bronn here. It's, again, that idea of self-preservation and growing up in a situation where you're lowborn. I think that is a lot of the reason as to why he does those things. But again, throughout this journey to the Eyrie, we see how skilled he is with a blade, which is something very interesting given it seems almost unnatural. Think about the way Catelyn describes Bronn. I'm going to read that quote out for you, but we're going to talk about it after I get done because I think it's very interesting. Catelyn had seen Bronn fight on the high road. It was no accident that he had survived the journey while other men had died. He moved like a panther, and that ugly sword of his seemed a part of his arm. Think about Catelyn. She's someone that's been around soldiers her entire life, but Bronn sticks out as being this extremely skilled fighter. Very interesting given the company she's also with, right? She's with Rodrik, who in his heyday was a pretty skilled swordsman as well. So all of this is very fascinating to understand because we have to look into Bronn's backstory. Was Bronn someone that just practiced a lot? Did he have a good teacher? All of this is left up to us, the reader, and maybe we'll get more as we go forward with the story, but all of this is interesting to consider with Bronn. But he is, in a lot of ways, one of the only reasons as to why Tyrion and Catelyn even survived to get the Eyrie as a whole. But throughout this journey, we see Tyrion picking up on who Bronn is as a person, right? Picking up on his actions. The two seem to kind of get along, right? And this is something that Tyrion is kind of plotting. He's trying to get some way out, and getting the best sword fighter of the group on your side is a good thing. And by the time we get to the Eyrie, we kind of have to skip a little bit because the next time we see Bronn is when he steps up to fight for Tyrion in the trial by combat. Again, another gamble that Tyrion takes, but if we're going into the eyes of Bronn, you're in a situation in which you have Catelyn, who has barely rewarded you, has almost got you killed. It's not someone you want to serve, right? Someone that is kind of throwing away lives for almost no reason and then screwing it up somehow. I think if you're Bronn, you're questioning her ability to lead you and be someone you want to serve under. And also the idea that you're not going to really get that reward that you really want. And so switching to Tyrion's side at this time is quite a big move. Now, it is a risky move, right? Vardis is a very good fighter, but he's not that great. And Bronn can use some of the advantages that he will have in the fight to his advantage. Throughout the fight that we see Bronn go into with Vardis, Bronn uses his reflexes, staying out of range of Vardis, wearing Vardis down, throwing things at Vardis, kind of pushing him around, and just cutting him here and there until he slowly breaks him down, killing Vardis and winning the trial by combat for Tyrion. And so we learn a lot about this, is that Bronn is someone that takes calculated risks, right? He is someone that realizes that he had a good chance against Vardis, but also realizes that he has a much higher reward now. He's not out of the woodwork, given that they still have to get out of the Vale, but he is instead going to get a chance at a better reward and a better life for himself, outside of what he would have gotten with Catelyn. This will kind of continue as Bronn and Tyrion are kind of our dynamic duo for the next 3 books, but Tyrion really recognizes what Bronn wants. Bronn wants more in general. He's not after one specific thing. He wants more. He wants more gold. He wants women. He wants more to drink. He would love a castle, all these things. He is someone that in general is looking for power and wealth, which is what a lot of people are wanting in this world. We have to follow then what happens next in the first book. We see Tyrion and Bronn making camp, and Tyrion eventually has to make an uneasy alliance with the mountain clans, and they end up reaching Tywin's forces. They are made to fight in the Battle of the Green Fork. But before this can happen, we see a little bit more of Bronn's personality, the way he deals with other people, and especially the way he deals with knights. He does not respect knights. He does not respect other people. Again, Bronn really strikes me as a character that he takes calculated risks. If he thinks he can beat you in a fight, he doesn't really respect you all that much. He will take what he wants as long as he can get away with it. And so he steals Shae for Tyrion. Again, it's also showing that he's trying to get favor from Tyrion, trying, again, be a good sword so that he can get a lot of those rewards and reap the benefits of going into service with Tyrion. But another thing you have to be thinking about if you're Bronn, They're going into a battle. Tyrion is going to be placed in a very bad position. In a lot of ways, Tyrion's placed there to die, but thankfully for Tyrion, I guess, Robb doesn't actually attack there with his full force, or else he probably would have died. But Bronn has to be thinking at this time, how do I keep Tyrion alive? Because if Tyrion dies, there goes my income, there goes my services. Like, yes, maybe I might get something from Tywin, but who knows? And you also have to think, if you're Bronn, will I even survive this huge battle as well? Because you got to remember, the Lannister camp thinks Robb is sending his full force at them. And that's huge. And Bronn's right on the front lines. So again, all of that's got to be playing into Bronn's mind at this point, and understanding that this is once again another calculated risk. Now, this one's not as much in his control, but he is part of it. But after the battle, Bronn accompanies Tyrion as he will become the new Hand of the King. And this is really important if you're Bronn. Tyrion, the person you are serving now, is basically the second most powerful person in the country. Now, that's not exactly true, given the way power works in Westeros, but given on titles, right? If you have your president, your vice president, Tyrion is the second most powerful person in the realm. And given that the king is kind of an idiot and Tyrion can, kind of take full power, Tyrion becomes the most powerful person in Westeros for a time. And so that is huge to understand if you're Bronn, and why Bronn is so loyal to Tyrion at this time, because he has so much to gain from him. That kind of gets us to book 2. So book 2, we're going to see Bronn really taking in this role of being Tyrion's right-hand man, being his enforcer. And he starts out pretty quickly. He starts out by getting gold from Tyrion to recruit 800 sellswords to protect Tyrion alongside the Gold Cloaks and Mountain Clansmen. Again, Tyrion is trying to make himself as powerful as possible. He knows that he is going to be a threat to Cersei's power and also Joffrey's power. So he wants to make sure he doesn't run into the same mistake that Ned found, where Ned didn't have any swords. He was very weak by the time he got taken down by Cersei. And so Tyrion goes about the opposite. And so Bronn shows himself as being very resourceful, able to relate to kind of the scum, I guess, because Westeros views sellswords as beneath them. He is someone that's not beneath that, being one of them. He's willing to connect to these people and bring them all under Tyrion's banner, vital to his defense of King's Landing as well. We also see Bronn throughout the book performing various orders, like protecting Tyrion during the riot, helping Sansa after Joffrey is humiliating her, and finding men for a scheme to free Jaime. Again, Bronn really gives me the vibes of a character like Daemon Targaryen on this part of the book. He is someone that is really taking control of the city in Tyrion's name. He's someone that really helps with keeping crime down a bit. He is someone that is able to find people that are willing to assassinate people and be like blood and cheese type. When you think about what ends up happening at Riverrun because of Bronn getting these men, all of that's really interesting to understand. And I think Bronn is a character that takes a lot of elements from other characters and kind of gets mixed into it. I think that's a very fascinating part of the character. And when we look at Daemon Targaryen and his time as the Prince of Fleabottom. And before the battle, we get a little bit more information that I find is interesting, because she actually comes up a little bit later on with Littlefinger. But at the time, Osmond Kettleblack is said to be an informant for Bronn. And this is interesting given that it shows Bronn playing the Game of Thrones. He is someone trying to get information on people that are going to go against his interest, right? Having Tyrion on his side is a really important part of this right now, because it lets Bronn have basically free reign of the city at this time. And so getting Cersei, getting stuff you can blackmail Cersei on is very interesting. Now, we know Osmond Kettleblack is not actually working for Bronn. We hear this later on that it's actually Littlefinger, but it is interesting. Another thing we also see before the battle is Bronn is instructed to clear the beaches for the battle. Again, Tyrion doesn't want people climbing on these little makeshift houses, having an easier way to get on top of the walls. He wants it to make it as hard as possible, have no cover, and make it just easy kills. Think about Normandy, right? D-Day in World War II, just storming the beaches. There wasn't a lot of cover. It was horrific scenes. That's what Tyrion's trying to basically create here on the beaches. And Bronn, again, is that enforcer. He's having to basically take people away from where they have been living and putting them elsewhere by any means necessary. The last thing we kind of see in this book is we see the Battle of the Blackwater. And Bronn has a very vital task. He is the one in charge of the huge chain to be lifted behind Stannis' fleet, blocking their retreat. Again, the focal point of Tyrion's plan and how he's going to break Stannis' fleet. It doesn't exactly working flawlessly, but it does the job, buying enough time for Tywin to get there. And after the battle, we see that Bronn is one of the 600 men who are knighted. And once again, Bronn has gained power. Now, Bronn himself might not really view knighthood as this big ordeal, like, you know, how Sansa builds up knights to be, but it's something that gives him influence. You know, having that Sir before your name, being an anointed knight, does carry a lot of weight and influence. It lets him continue to gain power, titles of that nature, all things that Bronn is trying to achieve. But I also want to think about where Bronn has gone in the span of, what, a year? Bronn in the span of a year went from a very poor sellsword with not much to his name to a landed knight with income to his name, serving one of the most powerful people in the country. Now, at this point, when Storm of Swords rolls over, not as true for Tyrion. Now, Tyrion is still someone that does have influence. He is someone that carries weight to his name, but it's not the same, right? Tyrion went from the top of the food chain down quite a lot of pegs and losing a lot of that power that allowed Bronn to become as powerful as he was in the previous book. But getting into A Storm of Swords, we see Tyrion recovering from his wounds, and Bronn reveals that Lord Tywin put him forward for knighthood. Now, this also serves another purpose, if you think about it. Bronn being knighted by Tywin is also kind of an ingenious move by Tywin himself. Tywin could easily see that Bronn was Tyrion's enforcer, someone that was his strength. And if Tywin could rip Bronn away, also realizing that Bronn's a very clever man and a good sword fighter, it's been proven multiple times now at this point, knighting him could be something where it was like Tywin trying to open that door to take Bronn from Tyrion, to really strip him of that power of having Bronn. I think that's an interesting point that really doesn't get talked about too much at this point of the story. But we see Sir Bronn of the Blackwater take a sigil, a green flaming chain, on a smoking gray field in commemoration of his role in the Battle of the Blackwater. Really cool sigil. You know, it is a little cliche given that's the battle he was in, but, you know, I still think it's really cool. But we also see a complete change in the way Bronn dresses now. He is someone that was, you know, very kind of poorly dressed, or someone that was a bit more rough around the edges, maybe is the way I would describe him. But now he wears soft leather boots, a wool doublet, and a pale green silk cloak. He looks more the part of a richer, upper-class person. All these things Bronn has never had, and given his status and where he came from, his clothing is probably worth more than his whole family probably had at his birth. So again, it just shows you that influence, because you also have to think Tywin either was paying Bronn as well, or because of the time that Bronn was in charge with Tyrion, he was able to accrue that wealth. He was able to manipulate things maybe under Tyrion's nose. He was able to gain income, very similar to Littlefinger, and put in a position of power. Again, showing that Bronn does know how to play the Game of Thrones as well as being a great sword fighter. But once again, we see throughout Storm, Bronn continues serving Tyrion, looking into Mandon Moor after he attempted to kill Tyrion. He is also present at Joffrey's wedding. But after the wedding and Joffrey's death, Tyrion is imprisoned, of course, and Bronn is wed off to Lolly's Stokeworth. Again, we see more throughout this whole book. One thing that's made very clear is that Bronn is trying to be persuaded to not be an ally to Tyrion, and this is kind of that cherry on top, giving Bronn a marriage to a lady. Now, given that she is not going to inherit the castle, Lolly Stokeworth also has a bastard, it would appear. She is not a favorable candidate, but for someone like Bronn, who is a poor sellsword at his origin, and Westeros really looks into that, that's a really big thing. It's a really good marriage for Bronn. And we'll kind of see a little bit more of the fruits of those seeds that were planted in this book in the next one. But Bronn does refuse Tyrion and his offer to be his champion. Again, Bronn is all about calculated risks, right? If he is going to do something that puts his life at risk, it's going to be for some benefit. And what benefit does he have of serving Tyrion? Even if he was to beat Tyrion and Tyrion was to be set free, Tyrion's power is completely gone, right? he's either going to be assassinated at some point by Cersei or Tywin, or if he goes to Dorne, he still won't command the influence that someone like Tywin would. And so Bronn is in this position now where he doesn't need Tyrion. Now, that's not to say Bronn doesn't have a respect for Tyrion or even like Tyrion. It's to say there's no point now of risking his life for Tyrion. When would Tyrion do the same? That's kind of the situation we're in at this point, and the risk just outweighs any reward Tyrion could give. And this is the last thing related to Bronn in this book, is that we realize that Osmond is not under Bronn. He's actually under Littlefinger. So again, it shows that Bronn is clever in ways that he's trying to get informants and things like that, but he still is not at that upper class of the Game of Thrones like Littlefinger. He's definitely a player, but he's not the player. And so this is kind of the last time we see Bronn on screen or on the page. He's in a little side plot for the rest of the series at this point. Hopefully we'll see him once again. But in Feast for Crows, he's kind of just this annoyance to Cersei. We see through the Stokeworths and Falsey Stokeworth, she is not happy with Bronn's presence, as he has gathered 4 knights to him, which they describe as being cutthroats, not true knights. Interesting, given Bronn's position as being the same. So Bronn, again, once again, he's bringing people that are like-minded to him, but it also, once again, just shows that people respect Bronn. People like Bronn. People are willing to fight for him. Again, it really gives you that vibe of Daemon Targaryen, and I really like that comparison. And at this, we also find out that Bronn has named Lawless's child Tyrion after the imp. Again, there's a lot of reasons as to why you might do this. The first reason is just the respect that he maybe have had for Tyrion, as Tyrion is the person that brought him up into the position he is now. Now, didn't do everything. Tywin did some of it as well as maybe Cersei. But at this point, he's almost baiting Cersei to do something. Like, it's almost like Bronn predicts exactly what Cersei's going to do. Cersei's going to try and have him killed, and Bronn can use that to his advantage because of how clever he is as a fighter to then do the opposite. Take out the current Lord Stokeworth and take the castle. It's an ingenious plan from Bronn, and it's one of those that goes under the radar because it works out perfectly. Not perfectly for Cersei, because later on we see that Lord Stokeworth actually challenged Bronn to a single combat joust. But instead, Bronn kills him. Again, Bronn is not an honorable guy. If it's self-preservation, he will do the less honorable action. And we see him hitting Lord Stokeworth's horse, very similar to Aerion Brightflame in the Dunk and Egg novellas. Again, I think there's a lot of things that point to some inspiration as to why George wrote the characters of like Bronn and things that Dunk will see and experiences and things with Daemon Targaryen. There's just a lot of similarities in those type of characters here. And he ends up killing the Lord Stokeworth. And this is a huge moment because Bronn now at this point trying to basically become the Lord of the castle. He's now gained wealth. He's gained a wife. He's gained land. He's now gained a castle. Cersei is forced to kill Tanda, again, because she can't have Tanda alive. Tanda knows exactly what her husband did. She is a big liability at this point. And Bronn almost seems like he knows this. It seems like he perfectly baited all these events to perfectly get to the point where he would become a lord. And that's it. In less than 3 years, Bronn went from a low-born sellsword to the lord of a castle. He may have done many actions that were morally gray, but he climbed the ladder of the Game of Thrones. And that's it. I really enjoyed talking about Bronn in this video because he's a character that I think for book readers only, he's an underrated character, but because the show really fleshed out his character and gave us more of it, he's not really, I wouldn't consider him an underrated character anymore because so many people like the character. I like talking about this character because he is someone very similar to a lot of the characters we've talked about on this list, but even more so. Like, Mance is a very morally gray character in a lot of ways, and I think Bronn gives us more of that. Because we're with the character of Bronn more, we see firsthand what he does and his actions. That is a lot of the reasons as to why I put him above Mance, is because we just know more about Bronn's personality. We know more about who he is without even knowing his backstory. And so, yeah, I mean, I just want to thank you guys all for, I hope you're enjoying this series and all of that. Thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.